Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
King of the Pirates by Alex0404. After eating a powerful logia devil fruit as a child, Luffy sets out to fulfill his dream of being the Pirate King. To fulfill his dream, he will gather a crew filled with fellow dreamers and conquer the Grand Line. The warlord of my channel are Zach Travis, Garrick Russell, Ben Brownlee, Case Clark, Tristan Ward, KSGPL4YZ, Brian McKenzie. Join the channel membership if you would like to support the channel.
Fuchsia Village East Blue. In the middle of Fuchsia Village sat Party's bar, and it is here that a group of visitors to Dawn Island sat partying and having a good time. These visitors were a notorious pirate crew, the Red Hair Pirates. "Hey Shanks, I wanna go with you and leave. I wanna be a pirate too," said a very excited 6-year-old to a red-haired man from his place next to Shanks at the bar. "Ha ha ha, as if you could ever be a pirate, Luffy," Shanks said. "And why not?" Luffy screamed back. "Listen, Luffy." Luffy looked over to see Lucky Roo and incredible rotund pirate move up next to him before he added, "You may be a good swimmer and all that, but that doesn't mean you'll make a good pirate," he finished with a teasing grin. "But I'm not just a good swimmer, I'm an awesome fighter too. My punches are as strong as pistols," he exclaimed as he held his fist out for everyone to see. "Are they now?" asked Shanks with a bored look on his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" Luffy shouted as he jumped onto his seat in righteous anger. His anger causing various pirates in the bar as well as Lucky Roo to chuckle and laugh at his antics. "He means you're still a kid, said a highly amused Lucky Roo. "They're not wrong, you know. I've got boys older than you," piped up Yassop. At hearing this, steam practically jumped out of Luffy's ears as a tick mark appeared on his forehead. "I'm not a kid, I'm a grown-up," Luffy screamed at the top of his voice. However, this only seemed to amuse the gathered pirates even more. "Here, sit down and drink some juice," said Shanks as he pushed a glass of juice along the bar towards Luffy, whose eyes lit up upon seeing the juice. "Wow, thanks, Shanks," he said as he started gulping the juice. However, as he started drinking the juice, Shanks burst out into hysterical laughter and started banging the counter of the bar. "Ha ha ha, I don't know any pirates that drink juice," Shanks managed to get out while still laughing. "That's a dirty trick and you know it," Luffy screamed at Shanks, his previous anger returning in an instant. This anger, however, only served to fuel the laughter of pirates even more. "Stop laughing, that was a cheap shot. Luffy, the captain is just worried about you. The life of a pirate is dangerous after all, especially where we're going." Ben Beckman, the first mate of the Red Hair Pirates, calmly said. "Nah, Shanks just likes making fun of me," gritted out Luffy. After saying this, both he and Ben looked over at Shanks, who was still giggling like a child over the prank he had just pulled. "It may be a bit of both," replied Ben while sweat dropping. Amidst all this, the owner of THR Bar, a beautiful woman called Makino, just looked with a warm smile on her face at the way Luffy and the Red Hair Pirates were bonding. This good mood, however, was immediately snuffed out as the doors to the bar were kicked off the hinges and came crashing into the bar. "Excuse us," said the leader of a new group of individuals with a sneer on his face. As he made his way towards the bar where Makino stood, Luffy got a good look at him and his men, and he saw that the leader was a tall man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with dark skin, long black hair, a goatee with an X-shaped scar over his right eye. His men meanwhile looked rather average, some even looking a bit weedy. "So this is what passes for pirates around here. What a joke," he said as when he stopped in front of the bar. "Hello gentlemen, how can I help you today?" asked Makino, trying not to show any of the nervousness that she was currently feeling. "The name's Higuma. Me and my men are mountain bandits, but we're not here to cause trouble and tear this place apart today. All we want is some sake." The leader cast a quick look over his men before adding, 10 barrels should do it." "Oh, I'm sorry, we're fresh out of sake right now," Makino said. At hearing that there was going to be no fighting, Luffy lost interest in the mountain bandits and began looking around the bar for something to do when he spotted a chest that Shanks and his crew had brought with them. Desperate to know what treasure Shanks had brought, he quickly opened the chest to see before his face morphed into a look of pure confusion. Within the treasure chest sat a strange fruit. It looked very similar to a pear but was blue and had some kind of strange swirl design all over it. Luffy's mind immediately went back to how Shanks and his crew had laughed at him and thought that the perfect revenge would be to eat their weird fruit. Quickly grabbing the fruit, he took a bite out of it only to recoil in disgust as it was the worst thing he had ever tasted in his life. It seemed to taste like a combination of seaweed, mud and strangely enough cough medicine. However, if there was one thing Makino had taught him, well, besides to say thank you when she gave him meat, it was to never waste food. So with this in mind, he quickly finished the fruit. As he did so, he caught the end of the conversation between the mountain bandit and Shanks. "Since you enjoy cleaning so much, why don't you clean this up too?" Higuma said as he swiped his saber across the counter of the bar and knocking its contents all over Shanks before exiting the bar. By the time the bandits had left the bar, Luffy's anger had reached boiling point and he screamed at the top of his voice, "What the hell was that?" "Calm down, Luffy, it's just some sake. It's nothing to get worked up over," Shanks responded in a calm and soothing tone. This, however, had no effect on Luffy's anger. If anything, it upset him even more. "What? He totally embarrassed you. So what if he had more men than you? So what if they had swords? You should have stuck up for yourself." Luffy paused for a moment before adding, "You're not a real man and you're not a real pirate either." After saying this, Luffy jumped down from the stool he had been stood on and made to leave the bar. Shanks adopted a pained expression at hearing this from the young boy that had, until just a few short minutes ago, idolized him. "Luffy, wait," Shanks said as he moved to put his head on Luffy's shoulder, only to suddenly recoil as he received a large electrical shock. Comprehension suddenly dawned on Shanks as he turned to look at the chest he had foolishly brought with him into the bar, only to find it empty. "Luffy, did you eat the fruit that was in that chest?" At hearing this question from their caption, every pirate in the bar stopped whatever they were doing or saying to look at Luffy. "So what if I did?" Luffy angrily responded. "You fool," Shanks shouted. Despite the fact that he was now shouting, it was obvious it was not out anger but more like panic. Sensing this, Luffy began to get scared, thinking that the fruit may have been poisonous. Noticing Luffy's growing fear, Shanks took a deep breath and ran a hand through his shoulder-length red hair to calm himself before continuing. "Luffy, that was a devil fruit. One of the cursed fruits of the sea. Eating one gives you great power but will forever rob you of the ability to swim." Upon hearing this, Luffy began to tear up and Shanks, wanting to put Luffy at ease, added, "Don't worry, we'll work out what devil fruit it was that you ate. I'm sure I've got a book about devil fruits lying about cabin somewhere. Whatever fruit it is, it's gotta have something to do with electricity or lightning," added Ben. "Ben," Shanks said. That one word was all it took for his first mate to know what it was his captain wanted. "On it, boss," was the brief reply before Ben left to return to the ship. He returned several minutes later and handed Shanks a small, battered leather-bound book that Shanks quickly flipped through, mumbling to himself as he did so. No, that's not it, not this one either. Maybe, yes, I think this one is it." "Luffy, think carefully, was this the fruit that you ate?" Luffy looked at the book and seeing the same strange pear fruit with the strange markings, he nodded and replied, "Yeah, that was it." Shanks let out a long sigh. "Luffy, that was the rumble fruit. It's an extremely powerful devil fruit you into a lightning man. Your body is now made from lightning." There was a brief pause before Luffy shouted out with his sparkling like 2 stars. "That's so cool, Fuchsia Village East Blue." After the debacle that was Luffy and his devil fruit, Shanks and the rest of the red hair pirates left Fuchsia Village, claiming that they needed to visit a nearby island and would be gone for a few days. It was 3 days after their departure that Luffy was sat once again in Party's bar, happily munching on some of Makino's delicious food. As Luffy sat there eating, the doors to the bar suddenly crashed open and in stepped Higuma. "So those sorry excuse for pirates fled, did they? Good, it doesn't stink as much in here now," Higuma said as he made his way towards the bar. Hearing this, Luffy grit his teeth in anger but kept his temper. "Bring us some sake over here, wench." "Of course, one moment," responded Makino with her best fake smile. As she said this, she shot Luffy a quick look, pleading with him to keep quiet. Seeing this, Luffy gave a short nod before going back to his food. The bandits began drinking the sake that Makino had brought to them, and the more they drank, the rowdier they became. It wasn't long before their talk turned to how they had humiliated the pirates that had been here when they were last in the bar. The longer they spoke ill of Shanks and the others, the harder it became for Luffy to hold onto his rapidly fraying temper. However, it was when Higuma called Shanks a coward that he snapped. "Shut up," he screamed at the leader of the bandits. "What did you just say to me, brat?" growled Higuma in a low and dangerous voice. "I said shut up. Don't call Shanks a coward. And at least he's a pirate and not a smelly bandit like you." Hearing this, Higuma immediately stood up and made to move to grab Luffy by the scruff of her neck, only for Makino to put herself between them and plead, "He's just a boy, he doesn't mean it, please don't hurt him." Higuma responded to this by slapping Makino across the face, causing her to tumble to the ground before barking at her, "Stay out of this, woman." Luffy, upon seeing Makino, a woman he genuinely loved like a sister, being hit like that, finally lost whatever hold he had on his temper and launched himself at Higuma with the intention of beating him to within an inch of his life. Unfortunately for Luffy, his intention and reality are two completely different things. Therefore, immediately after landing a punch to Higuma's stomach that, to the surprise of the other mountain bandits, caused Higuma to let out a grunt, he was swatted painfully to one side and he flew straight through the bar doors. Now outside the bar, Luffy attempted to get to his feet despite the pain he was now in. However, before he could get to his feet, he was kicked by Higuma, which caused him to tumble further down the road near the village center. Once again he started to get to his feet, and as he did so he noticed Higuma getting closer to him, and with a guttural roar he launched himself at Higuma, striking him in the stomach once again. However, to surprise of everyone, when the blow landed, electricity quickly covered the bandit leader, shocking him briefly. Luffy was now panting from the energy it took to land the second blow and use his devil fruit power. So when Higuma retaliated by backhanding him to the floor and restraining him with his boot to his chest, Luffy could do little more than struggle feebly on the ground. Seeing the young boy struggling to get free and in obvious pain, the other bandits started laughing at Luffy's plight. It was at that moment, however, that Makino and the mayor of Fuchsia village ran up to the group. "Please don't hurt the boy. We'll pay you whatever you want, just please let him go," the mayor begged. "No, the brat disrespected me then attacked me. I'm gonna kill him." Hearing this, Makino gasped as her eyes began to fill with tears. Higuma unsheathed his sword and raised it in preparation for ending Luffy's life. However, just before he could begin to bring it down, a voice called out from behind the group, "I was wondering why there was nobody at the docks to greet us." Every member of the group turned and Shanks with his crew stood behind him. Shanks looked down at Luffy and chuckled before saying, "So much for your punches being as strong as a pistol. Get out of here, pirate, this doesn't concern you," Higuma growled at Shanks. "I think you'll find it does. You see, that's my friend you've got there," Shanks responded in a seemingly light and conversational tone. "This brat disrespected me. Ha ha ha, aren't you a mountain bandit with a bounty of 8 million? Shanks replied. Seeing that the pirates weren't about to leave, one of the bandits approached Shanks and stuck a pistol in his face and screamed for them to leave or die. As soon as this happened, Shanks' whole demeanor changed and he suddenly grew more serious than Luffy had ever seen him. "Bet your life on it." Seeing that the bandit didn't understand, he continued, "Now that you've drawn your pistol, are you ready to bet your life? After all, pistols are meant for action, not threats." As soon as he uttered the last word, Lucky Roo appeared, in the blink of an eye, at the side of the bandit that had been threatening his captain and shot him in the head. "Damn pirates, that was a dirty trick," shouted one of the bandits. Hearing this, every pirate present started laughing heartily before Shanks responded, mirth still evident in his voice. "What, did you think we were saints or something? The men in front of you are pirates." The anger at seeing one of his men killed like that caused Higuma to order his men to attack. "Don't worry, Captain, I've got this," said Ben right before what Luffy could only describe as a humiliating and one-sided beatdown. Ben wasted no time whatsoever as he leapt at the bandits while wielding his rifle like a club. It only took mere moments for Ben to take down the majority of the bandits, dropping 2 or sometimes even 3 bandits with a single swing of his rifle. Seeing his men being taken down rapidly, Higuma began to panic and was about to flee, taking Luffy with him as a hostage. However, as he bent down to grab his hostage, Luffy began to struggle once again before screaming at the top of his voice, "Go away!" As Luffy screamed this command, a massive bolt of lightning descended from the sky and struck Higuma, throwing him off Luffy. When Luffy got up, he looked over to where the bandit leader had been thrown and was nearly sick when he saw the charred remains. Seeing Luffy's distress, Shanks quickly approached and scooped the boy up into his arms and began walking back to the bar. Seeking to take the young boy's mind of the fact that he has just ended the life of another human being, even if it was just a bandit, he calmly spoke. "I want to thank you, Luffy. You defended me against that bandit." Luffy was currently sniffling and attempting to fight back the tears currently forming in his eyes. Noticing this, Shanks added, "It's okay to cry, Luffy. Men don't cry because they're weak but because they've tried to be strong for too long." Upon hearing this, Luffy immediately started sobbing his heart out. It took about an hour for Luffy to calm down and then another hour before he was back to his usual self. Soon after this, it was almost like the whole event with Higuma and his bandits never happened as Luffy and the pirates continued their banter. "Ha ha ha, you want to be a pirate but you don't know anything about life on the sea," Shanks said as he roared with laughter. "Shut up, you stupid tomato hair. I don't need to know that stuff. I'm going to be the captain so my crew can take care of all that stuff." Ever the voice of reason, Ben chimed in from his seat beside Luffy. "You know the captain has a point, Luffy. Even if you're the captain you still need to know stuff like navigation, nutrition, carpentry and various other skills. After all, it's the captain's job to not just lead his crew but to help where it's needed." Seeing the thoughtful look on Luffy's face, he continued. "Think of it like this. The captain has to be the jack of all trades on a ship. They need to be able to navigate but not as well as an actual navigator. They need to be able to cook but not necessarily a chef." "Oh yeah? Well, where am I gonna learn all that, eh?" Luffy fired back at Ben. Ben just chuckled. "Don't worry about it, you just leave it to me." The next day, the Red Hair Pirates once again left on a short trip to a nearby island to gather intel on the various marine bases nearby they can raid when they finally leave to return to the Grand Line. While they were gone, Luffy was sat in Party's bar pondering what Ben had said him. Eventually he came to a decision, one he was sure would help him achieve his dream. Now all he had to do was wait for Tomato Hair to get back. Time skip 6 days of later. It was 6 days after Luffy came to his decision that Shanks returned, and as soon as he got through the door Luffy appeared in front of him as if summoned by magic. "Shanks, teach me. I want to be a great pirate and I need you to teach me." "Ha ha ha, finally recognizing how awesome I am, Luffy." Recognizing growth and maturity that Luffy had just shown in asking for help, Shanks refrained from any further teasing. "Sure thing, Luffy." Hearing this, Luffy flashed a huge face-splitting grin. Unknown to Luffy, even though Shanks was going to teach him things, he was still planning on messing with him mercilessly. "In fact, time for your first lesson. Come, let's sit down." "Now Luffy, what's a man's most dangerous weapon?" asked a smirking Shanks. "His fists," shouted an energetic Luffy. A small shake of Shanks' head told Luffy his guess was incorrect. "His sword." And again a shake of Shanks' head told him his guess was wrong, so trying again he shouted, "His pistols." Yet again a shake of Shanks' head told him wrong. So confused and starting to lose his temper with the red-haired pirate, he screamed, "Well then, what is it?" Luffy's ire seemed only to fuel the smirk on Shanks' face. "His charm, of course." Hearing the scoff from Luffy, he continued, "It's true. With charm you can talk your way out of almost any problem before it even becomes a problem. A man's charm is what helps him to lead his crew throughout the tough challenges they face." Seeing that Luffy was now paying attention, his smirk grew even more and he added, "It's also essential to get yourself a few lady friends." "I am not interested in that, you dirty old man. I just want to be a pirate," retorted Luffy angrily. "Ha ha ha, Luffy, you said it yourself that I'm a great pirate and I've had lots of lady friends. Therefore to be as great as me, so do you." Seeing the sudden look of contemplation on Luffy's face, Shanks then went in for the kill. "Now here's everything you need to know about the Farer SX." The conversation that took place over the following few hours Luffy would later describe as perhaps the most embarrassing and uncomfortable of his life, as Shanks told him everything he needed to know about women as well as what he called the birds and the bees. The Red Hair Pirates continued to stay around Dawn Island for the next 4 weeks, occasionally disappearing every now and then for reconnaissance. It was over the time they were at Dawn Island that Luffy learned everything he could from them. Little nuggets of information that would serve him well when he set off on his own adventure, soaking up as much information as he could like sponge. However, the Red Hair Pirates could not stay in the East Blue forever and had to return to the Grand Line. On the day of their departure, as they were loading the last of their supplies, that Ben approached Luffy with a small duffel bag in hand. Yo Ben! What's in the bag? Is it meat? At just the very thought of meat, Luffy began to drool. Smiling, Ben looked down at him. In the bag is few books put together by me and the rest of the crew. We all contributed towards them. Groaning in disappointment, Luffy just mumbled that books were boring and he'd rather have some meat. Ben just chuckled at this. In those books are everything you need to know about life at sea. The books won't make you a master navigator or a doctor or anything, but they will teach you the skills you'll need at sea. Ben set the duffel bag down at Luffy's feet before opening the bag to show Luffy that it was indeed crammed full of books and not meat. In fact, the captain even jotted down a lot of stuff for you. Stuff like training exercises. Exercises that will be important if you want to make a name for yourself on the Grand Line someday. Hearing this, Luffy's face morphed into his trademark grin and he rushed forwards and hugged Ben. You know, Luffy, you should see the captain before we set sail. I know he's going to miss you. Nodding at this, Luffy set off to the docks where Shanks was. He was about to say goodbye when Shanks spoke, unable to resist one last opportunity to tease the young boy. What, not going to beg me to take you with us? Never able to resist being baited, Luffy immediately snapped back. Why would I want to sail with you? Smirking, Shanks replied, good, cuz I'd never sail with a little anchor like you. Then proceeded to do the most mature thing possible and stick his tongue out at the young boy. Just you wait, I'm gonna set sail myself, and I am going to gather my own crew and they're going to be 1,000,000 times better than yours. Then I'm going to find the One Piece and I'll be king of the pirates, shouted Luffy. His emotions starting to get the better of him, he looked down so his idol wouldn't see his tears. Is that so? Well, in that case you are going to need this, said Shanks as he put his iconic straw hat onto Luffy's head. Take care of this hat for me, Luffy. It's very important to me. And when you're a great pirate one day you can give it back. That hat symbolizes our promise that we'll meet again. Luffy just pulled the further down so as to better hide his face as his tears flowed more freely. Seeing this, Shanks turned away and walked onto his ship. Once the ship had moved away from the pier, Luffy looked up and shouted, "Bye, Shanks," as he waved goodbye at the retreating ship. I've changed a few things from canon again, such as Shanks not losing his arm and Luffy attempting to learn what he can about being a pirate from his idol. Fuchsia Village, East Blue. Today was the day. Today was Luffy's 17th birthday and the day he was beginning his journey upon the open seas to become the king of the pirates. Much had changed in the past 10 years since the departure of the Red Hair Pirates. Luffy was now 6 foot tall with a slim but athletic build. He was wearing a pair of black trousers, black shoes, a bright red dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbow and the top 3 buttons undone, and his signature straw hat. Completing his outfit was, draped over his shoulders, his brand new captain's coat that had been given to him today by Makino for his birthday. Luffy loved his new coat as it looked the same as the one worn by Gold Roger, except it was black instead of red. Strapped to his side was his saber, which had been a gift from his foster mother Deiden for his 16th birthday, and while it was fairly low quality, Luffy loved it all the same. Hidden from view, strapped to his belt at the small of his back, was a pair of new flintlock repeater pistols. These had been mailed back to Dawn Island by Luffy's big brother Ace about a year ago. These pistols were of a new South Blue design that allowed the user to fire 6 rounds before needing to be reloaded. Standing on the dock about to get into his little dinghy, Luffy reflected back on how far he has come since he last stood on this dock. True to his word, the books Ben and the other Red Hair pirates had wrote for him hadn't made him a master pirate, but what they did do was give him the tools he needed to become a great pirate. From the books he'd learned basic navigation, basic nutritional information necessary for life at sea, first aid and the various treatments for common ailments when at sea, various swordplay and shooting tips and tricks, how to repair his equipment and ship. However, the last book was what was most important, and it was the one that had been written by Shanks. Within that book was a wealth of information on what for years Luffy could only refer to as a mystery power. And together with his older brother Ace, and before his death Sabo, they spent years trying to unlock this mystery power, and then another few years trying to master it. This mystery power is called Haki, and it's something only strong pirates even know about. However, Luffy still enjoys occasionally referring to it as a mystery power because of the look on everyone's faces when he says it. The training that Ace and Luffy put themselves through not only strengthened their dream of becoming pirates but also helped Luffy master his devil fruit abilities. When Luffy first attempted to use his lightning abilities, he couldn't so much as hit a tree in a forest with an attack. However, now he not only has complete control over his lightning but has also created a few special attacks that he can use in a fight. Taking a deep breath, Luffy stepped into his dinghy and pushed off from the dock. He turned around to look at every villager gathered to see him off. "Bye, Luffy. Good luck out there. Make sure you come back with exciting stories." As the various villagers that Luffy had come to know and love over the years of living on Dawn Island were shouting their various goodbyes, Luffy locked eyes with Makino, and upon seeing the bright smile on her face, he flashed his trademark face-splitting grin. "I'm gonna be the king of the pirates," yelled Luffy at the top of his voice. Before turning around, he cast one last look over the small town and he saw his foster mother Deiden trying to hide behind one of the houses. Deiden was a large woman, easily over 7 feet tall and with a bulk to match, with curly bright orange hair and a cigarette in her mouth. Seeing her beginning to tear up while trying to remain stoic, he locked eyes with her and gave her a small smile. Turning around in his little dinghy, he once again faced the open ocean. However, just a few minutes into his journey, Luffy faced his first challenge as a small sea king, known locally as the Lord of the Coast, rose up from beneath the waves. The Lord of the Coast was a sea king that resembled a large eel. It has over 40 feet long with brown scales and teeth as long as Luffy's entire arm. Seeing the appearance of the Sea King that had eaten many local fishermen over the years, the villagers ceased their goodbyes and suddenly fell silent. Luffy's reaction was different, however, as he simply stared at the Sea King impassively. As the Sea King reared its head back in preparation of a lunge at Luffy, Luffy just narrowed his eyes and focused on his mystery power, "Get lost." Upon this command from Luffy, the Sea King froze in fear and slowly backed up. Then all of a sudden, and with all the speed it could manage, it dove back beneath the waves. Seeing the Sea King fleeing, Luffy raised his arms in the air and yelled out in victory. The villagers also saw the Sea King retreat. They were complete clueless as to why. They just knew it had something to do with Luffy. Regardless of what caused it to flee, every single villager present let out a massive cheer for Luffy's victory over the sea monster. Hearing the cheer, Luffy turned around and acknowledged them with his typical face-splitting grin. That excitement was not to last, however, as nothing of note happened for another day. It was during the second day of his journey that Luffy suddenly woke up from his nap as he felt his dinghy rock suddenly. Looking over the side of his dinghy, Luffy noticed that during his nap his little dinghy had drifted dangerously close to a whirlpool. Knowing that he was now too close to the whirlpool to row away and needing an option for survival, he quickly scanned his surroundings. About half a mile away, Luffy spotted 2 ships. One was quite large but plain and obviously civilian, as it had no cannons whatsoever. The other ship could only be described as a monstrosity. It was pink with love hearts decorating it and a swan with love hearts for eyes as the shop's figurehead. The Jolly Roger flying atop THR ship gave the ship away as a pirate vessel. Observing the 2 ships, it was obvious the pirate ship was about to raid the civilian ship. So with this in mind, Luffy utilized his devil fruit powers and transformed himself into lightning and teleported himself onto the pirate vessel. Appearing on the deck of the pink monstrosity, every single pirate turned to look at the newcomer that had literally just appeared in a flash of lightning. "Who are you? You don't look like the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro to me," shouted a voice from the top deck of THR ship. Luffy looked up to see the fattest and ugliest woman he'd ever seen, and he used to live Deiden, a mountain bandit. She was wearing what could be loosely described as a cowgirl outfit and was wielding a large metal club. "So, have you come for the bounty of Iron Mace, Alvida?" asked the newly identified Alvida. "Nope, didn't even know who you were, you fat hag," Luffy responded in a bored tone. Upon the words, fat, and hag, being said, 2 things happened simultaneously. Firstly, every member of Alvida's crew froze in fear and began to tremble. And secondly, Alvida grit her teeth in fury and a moment later launched herself at Luffy with her club in hand, intending on turning him into little more than a red smear on the deck of her ship. Seeing the ATTCK coming from a mile away and simply stepped aside to avoid it, coated his fist in hockey, then planted his fist into the back of Alvida's head. This single blow to the back of the head was enough to knock out Alvida and cause her to bounce off the deck of the ship 10 feet into the air. Upon seeing their captain laid out the deck, the rest of the crew took that as their signal to ATTCK the straw-hatted invader en masse. For Luffy, the next few minutes were highly enjoyable, and he ducked and weaved the sloppy attacks from the pirate, occasionally striking back with a fist covered in lightning. Unbeknownst to everyone, while the fight was occurring, an orange-haired teen wearing a short blue skirt, a blue striped white t-shirt with orange gladiator sandals, stealthily snuck aboard T-way below deck. Within just a few short minutes, all of the Alvida pirates lay strewn about the deck, bleeding, unconscious and covered in various burns due to Luffy's lightning attacks. Noticing that the crew had been dealt with, at least for the time being, Luffy quickly set about to work weighing in the anchor and unfurling the sails to get the ship away from the civilian ship and any possible marine ships that may be answering their distress signal. Once the ship was a significant distance away, Luffy began removing the crew of the Alvida pirates from his new ship and dumping them overboard, only pausing long enough to restrain Alvida with some rope that had been helpfully on the deck of the ship. It was once Luffy had finished this task that he came across a small pink-haired young man wearing thick glasses cowering behind a crate on the deck. "Who are you then?" Luffy asked in pure confusion. I'm Kobe. I was brought aboard this ship to work as a cabin boy after I mistook a pirate dinghy for a fishing boat." Luffy just stared at Kobe, giving him what many would describe as the stink eye before bursting out into boisterous laughter. "Ha ha ha, that's the funniest thing I've heard in like forever. You've gotta be really dumb to mistake a pirate ship for a fishing one." After saying this, he noticed that Kobe seemed to shrink in on himself and became incredibly disheartened, so he added, "What do you want to do now then?" Kobe paused for a minute before sighing and saying, "I don't know." "Well, you got any dreams, kid?" Luffy asked in genuine interest as he leant against a nearby crate. Well, I've always dreamed of becoming a Marine Admiral one day ever since I was a kid." There was a slight pause before Kobe looked earnestly into Luffy's eyes. "Do you think I can do it?" Kobe added the last part in little more than a whisper. "How the hell should I know?" Luffy asked in a nonchalant tone before adding in an earnest voice, "Only you have the power to achieve your dreams. Others can help you achieve them, but if you don't fight for your own dream, then they'll never come true." "What about you? What's your dream?" Kobe asked. "Me? I'm gonna be the king of the pirates," Luffy said with his usual grin in place. This, however, only served to make Kobe incredibly nervous. "You want to be the pirate king? Then that means you're going to sail the Grand Line and find the One Piece," Kobe managed to stutter out. "Yeah, I sure am," Luffy said with a bright smile. There was a slight pause before Kobe said with what appeared to be unusual conviction, No, that's impossible. Impossible, I tell you." That was as far as Kobe got into his tirade before he was interrupted by a swift fist to the top of his head courtesy of Luffy. "What did you do that for?" Kobe asked with tears in his eyes. "I felt like it," Luffy said with a shrug. "Besides, you said my dream was impossible. I don't care how dangerous it is, it's my dream, and I die trying to reach it, then that just means it wasn't meant to be." Kobe stared at Luffy in awe of the conviction he had just shown. "I'm going to do it, I'm going to become a Marine." Luffy just chuckled. "Hey, what did that fat hag say about that pirate hunter? Do you know anything about him?" At this, Kobe's nervousness returned. "I've heard that Roronoa Zoro isn't even human, that he's just a demon in human skin." At seeing Luffy's interest in Zoro increasing with his hearing, Kobe just let out a defeated sigh before asking, "What do you want with Zoro anyway?" "I'm gonna ask him to join my pirate crew, of course," replied Luffy with his usual grin. "You know where I can find him?" "I heard he was captured and imprisoned in the Marine base in Shell's Town. That's not too far from here, you know." "Great. Let's plot a course for Shell's Town," Luffy yelled in excitement. Excitement that quickly interrupted when the orange-haired teen that had snuck aboard earlier appeared on deck holding a bag of what seemed to be stolen treasure over her shoulder. Realizing that she's been spotted, she froze as she attempted to formulate a decent escape plan. "Is she one of Alvida's pirates?" Luffy whispered to Kobe. Upon hearing this, the orange-haired teen exploded in anger at Luffy's belief that she was a pirate. "Don't even call me one of them. I'd never stoop so low as to be a pirate." Hearing this, Luffy decided to change tactics slightly and approached her with a smile on his face and his hand outstretched as he said, "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, it's great to meet you." It was this precise time that Luffy sent a mental thank you to Shanks for one of the few things he taught him, and as THR girl went to take his hand to shake it, he grasped it gently and brought it to his lips and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "And just what might your name be?" Luffy asked. Due to Luffy's act of kissing her knuckles, the girl had blushed rather heavily, but that did not stop her responding, "Nami, my name's Nami." Luffy's charm now dialed all the way up to 11 out of 10 simply said, "Nami, a beautiful name for a beautiful girl." Seeing her blush deepen, he continued, "Tell me, Nami, what's in the bag?" At his question, Nami froze in fear. She had after all heard the fighting that had barely lasted any time, and she now noticed that the entirety of Alvida's crew was now absent and therefore had been defeated by the young man in front of her, the same young man that didn't even have so much as a scratch on him. As Luffy had just fought against a group of pirates, Nami believed Luffy to be somewhat anti-pirate and she decided to take a gamble. "It's treasure. You see, I'm a thief that steals exclusively from pirates," Nami said with a slight smirk. Luffy simply smirked and said, "Is that so?" Looking her up and down and quickly analyzing her to establish how much of a threat she could be, he added, "So where you headed, Nami?" Luffy questioned in a light tone. "Shellstown, I'm heading to Shellstown. There's something there I need to pick up." "What a coincidence," Luffy said, beaming. "That's where we're heading to. You know, you're welcome to hitch a ride with us if you want." "Yeah, that'd be appreciated," Nami said, chuckling slightly. "By the way?" "Yeah?" asked Luffy. Can I have my hand back?" Nami asked nervously with a blush still on her face. "Oh, sorry. My mistake," Luffy said, but by the smile on his face it was obvious to Nami that the mistake was not genuine, something that only caused her blush to deepen. Turning to Kobe, Luffy said, just pointed to the Jolly Roger of the Alvida pirates that was still flying atop the mast and said, "It's an eyesore. Get rid of it." Once the Jolly Roger had been taken down and was now floating in the sea, Luffy then shouted, "Onwards to Shell's Town. And let's turn this world upside down." He then flashed his signature face-splitting grin to the other two. This grin seemed to be infectious as it caused the other two to suddenly grin. Shell's Town, East Blue. It took another 4 days of sailing to reach Shell's Town, and in that time Luffy learned all he could about the people he had aboard his new ship. He learned that Kobe was a bit of a coward but had a burning passion for justice, and true justice rather than the absolute justice spouted by the Marines. As for Nami, well, all he was able to learn about her was that she was an exceptional navigator and she was obsessed with money. After they pulled up to the dock of Shell's Town and disembarked, Nami turned to Kobe and Luffy and said, "Well, I guess this is it. I'm sure I'll see you guys around sometime." A charming smile firmly in place, Luffy simply responded, "I can't wait." The combination of Luffy's smile and his words caused Nami's almost perpetual blush that she'd had since meeting Luffy to return in full force once more. Attempting to hide her blush, she turned on her heel and walked as quickly as she could, without running, straight into town. Chuckling slightly at her retreating form, he then turned to Kobe and said, "Come on, let's get to it then." And without even waiting for a reply from Kobe, he started making his way towards the center of the town, dragging a still tied-up Alvida. Jogging slightly to keep pace with Luffy, Kobe asked, Luffy sir, what are you planning on doing with Alvida?" Hearing this question, Luffy just turned to look at Kobe as if he was stupid. "She has a bounty of 5 million. I'm gonna cash in her bounty. Technically I'm not a pirate yet, so the Marines have no reason not to pay me, and I need all the cash I can get." Hearing this, Kobe looked a bit embarrassed at not realizing the obvious. A short while later, after paying a visit to the bounty office of the Marine base, Luffy was walking through town 5 million richer. He then made a quick stop by what passed as a shipwright around these parts to get the ship repainted and figurehead removed so he wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen sailing it. Completing a few of the tasks he gave himself to complete on this island, he then set about achieving his main goal while he was here, recruiting Roronoa Zoro as his first mate. Luffy turned to Kobe and asked, "So where do you think we'll find this Zoro guy?" Upon hearing Zoro's name, every nearby townsperson flinched, something that wasn't missed by either Kobe or Luffy. You see, everyone is terrified just by Zoro's name, but at least there's a strong Marine presence on the island, and I've heard they're led by Captain Axe Hand Morgan. Yet again every nearby townsperson flinched upon hearing a name, except this time it was at the mention of Captain Morgan, and yet again this was missed by neither Luffy nor Kobe. I wonder everyone's scared of Morgan. I can understand with Zoro because the guy's a demon in human skin, but Captain Morgan's a Marine, Kobe said in almost childlike confusion. Letting out a deep sigh, Luffy tried his best to explain this particular situation. "Listen, Kobe, not all Marines are good and not all pirates are bad. The world's not black and white, and after all, power corrupts. Seeing that Kobe seemed to be pondering his words, he decided he'd given the lad enough to think about, so changed the subject slightly. "Didn't you say this Zoro guy got arrested?" At seeing Kobe nod, he continued, "Well, he'll be around the marine base somewhere, won't he? Come on, let's go." Arriving at the marine base at the edge of town, the duo came upon a courtyard, and at the center of the courtyard was a young man tied to a simple cross. The young man was wearing simple loose-fitting black pants, a white loose-fitted shirt, simple black boots one would commonly find on a pirate, and a black bandana on his head. As the duo were on the wall to the courtyard and observing the man tied to the cross, a ladder appeared beside them and a young girl no older than 6 or 7 climbed up. When she got to the top of the wall, she put her index finger to her lips in the universal signal to be quiet before she jumped down into the courtyard and approached the restrained figure. "Here, I thought you might be hungry, so I made you these rice balls," said the little girl in a shy voice. "You got a death wish or something, kid?" the restrained man said in a low voice, attempting to intimidate the young girl. "But it's my fault you're all tied up here," said Scram Kid. Back at the wall, Kobe turned to Luffy and said, "You see, the man's a demon. Look at the way he's trying to scare that little girl." Luffy, however, just looked thoughtful at this. Now Zoro, don't be mean. Nobody likes a bully after all." Luffy and Kobe looked over to see 2 Marines and a teen wearing a flamboyant purple suit enter the courtyard. "Oh, thank God the Marines are here. At least the little girl should be safe now," stated Kobe. Luffy just hummed noncommittally, however, as a few things to this entire situation just weren't adding up properly for him. "Oh, what's this? Rice balls? Well, don't mind if I do," the blonde teen in the purple suit said. However, immediately upon eating one of the rice balls, he spat it straight back out in disgust. What the hell did you put in these? Did you make them with sugar? You're supposed to use salt, you stupid girl," he screamed in his whining nasal voice. After saying this, he grabbed the other rice ball from the girl and began stomping it into the ground. "But I thought they'd taste better sweet," said the little girl as she began to tear up. "God, this is why I hate kids. Look, little girl, do you see that sign over there? It says any citizen caught aiding a criminal is to be executed, and it's signed by my daddy, Captain Morgan." At hearing this, a few things began to make sense to Luffy, but he kept quiet and decided to see how things would play out. The blonde teen, now identified as Captain Morgan's son, saw that girl was now sobbing, so simply let out a deep sigh and turned to one of the Marines behind him and ordered, "You there, toss that girl over the wall." Hearing this, the Marine became incredulous. "But sir, she's only a little girl." "Didn't you hear me? I ordered you to throw her over the wall. If you don't do as I say, I'll tell daddy on you," the blonde teen shouted as he stamped his foot in a ridiculously childish manner. The Marine, knowing this to not be an idle threat and seeing firsthand the consequences that Captain Morgan deals out for insubordination, relented and scooped up the little girl into his arms. As he neared the wall to throw her over, he whispered into her ear so as not to be overheard by the bratty teen, "Listen, kid, just tuck yourself into a ball and try and roll when you hit the ground." With his advice given, he proceeded to throw the little girl over the wall. Despite being a pirate and therefore not a hero, Luffy isn't the type of person to sit by and watch a little girl get hurt like that, and so utilizing his devil fruit powers, he transformed himself into lightning, caught the little girl and teleported them both to the ground. Now safely on the ground, he gave her a wide, beaming smile and affectionately tousled the little girl's hair. With the girl now safe, Luffy returned to his previous spot on the wall, only to catch the back end of whatever the blonde brat was saying to restrained man. "Ha ha ha, you've been here for 3 weeks with no food and water already, Zoro. Only 10 days to go," the blonde brat said in a clearly mocking tone. "I'll survive the next 10 days, don't you worry about me," Zoro said in a dangerously low voice. "We'll see, Zoro, we'll see." Once the blonde teen had finally left the courtyard, Zoro now noticed Luffy and Kobe. "Hey, you two, you're an eyesore, get lost. Man, you've been tied up here with no food or water for 3 weeks already. Damn, I don't think I'd even last 3 days, said Luffy with a chuckle. Unamused by Luffy's comment, Zoro said, "That's the difference between the two of us. Unlike you, I have willpower and dedication. What do you want anyway?" "I just came to see the dangerous pirate hunter Roronoa, Zoro," said Luffy with a smirk, and upon seeing the frown on Zoro's face when the moniker pirate hunted, "and to get him to join my crew." Hearing the last sentence from Luffy caused Zoro to glare at Luffy with the intensity of sun, "So you're a pirate?" At seeing Luffy's nod of confirmation he added, "Not interested. I've got a dream to fulfill and I'd never stoop so low as to be a pirate," said Zoro with a sneer. Undeterred by this rejection, Luffy just smiled and said, "We'll see." He then turned and left the marine base and began the trek back into town. Before Luffy could leave, however, Zoro shouted over to him, "Hey, wait a minute. That rice ball, give it to me." Luffy just laughed. What happened to all that willpower and dedication? Luffy then looked at the rice ball in question before asking, "Are you sure, cuz it looks to be more mud than rice ball at this point?" "Yes. Now give it to me. All of it." Upon hearing this, Luffy obliged, grimacing in distaste, and Zoro choked down the ball of mud with grains of rice in it. After eating, Zoro choked out, "The girl. Tell the girl they were delicious. The best thing I've ever eaten." Sure thing, Zoro. Already there were several things about this whole situation that did not make sense to Luffy, and realizing that he needed more information, he decided to track down the little girl from the courtyard. A short while later, Luffy and Kobe were sat in a small cafe owned by the mother of the little girl, now known to be called Rika. "Really? He said that?" asked an excited Rika. "Sure did. He ate every last crumb," replied Luffy with an indulgent smile on his face. "Luffy, I don't understand why you want him on your crew. He's being punished by the Marines. He's obviously a criminal," stated an exasperated Kobe. Before Luffy could retort, Rika piped up, "Shut up. Big brother, Zoro is not a criminal. He's only tied up because of the deal he made with Helmeppo, the captain's son." Seeing this as his opportunity to learn more about his future first mate, Luffy asked the question, "What happened?" This question had an immediate effect on Rika, as she went from angry on Zoro's behalf to sad and downcast. Helmeppo came into the cafe and demanded to eat for free, but he brought his pet wolf with him. When he was eating, his wolf attacked me and tried to kill me, but it was stopped by Big Brother Zoro, who killed it. When Helmeppo saw his pet wolf dead, he threatened to have me and my mum executed, but Zoro offered himself instead. Helmeppo then offered him the deal: 1 whole month in the courtyard with no food or water, and he can go free. After Rika finished her tale, Luffy just turned to look at Kobe and grinned before saying, "Told you he was a good guy." Kobe, however, just looked like he had his whole world view shattered. His whole life he had believed the Marines to be just and honorable and criminals to be the bad guys. Yet the longer he spent in this town, the more and more this view was shattered. Kobe's inner musings were cut short as the door to the cafe burst open and in sauntered Helmeppo with his 2 Marine guards. Plonking himself down in a seat, he barked at Rika's mother, "Hey you, bring me some food and make it snappy. And it better be free or my daddy will hear about." Luffy decided not to intervene and potentially make things worse for the townspeople. This resolve was severely tested the longer he had to endure the company of Helmeppo. "By the way everyone, since I'm bored, I've decided to execute Zoro tomorrow, so make sure you're there to see it," said Helmeppo in a bored voice. This was the final straw for Luffy, and he began to stalk towards the little brat. Helmeppo, seeing this, sneered, "What do you want, peasant? How dare you, Lu?" That was as far as he got before Luffy's fist impacted his face, sending him crashing through the door to the cafe. Now lying on the street with blood pouring from his nose, he managed to stutter out, "You hit me. You actually hit me. Nobody has ever hit me before." Seeing the uncaring face of Luffy, he added, "Wait till I tell my daddy on you." After saying this, Luffy made to move towards him, and noticing this, Helmeppo quickly got up and ran away with his tail tucked firmly between his legs and his 2 bodyguards in tow. "Tch, what a waste of human organs," growled out Luffy. He then realized that he needed to do something about the Zoro situation, and he immediately turned himself into lightning and teleported himself back into the courtyard of the marine base. "Tch, you again? I thought I told you to get list already," said Zoro. "I was just in town and the captain's bastard son just announced that he plans on executing you tomorrow and invited the town to come watch." Hearing this, Zoro could only growl, "That little shit. Just wait till I get my hands on that little shit." Zoro began to struggle against the ropes that restrained him against the cross. "Oh, I'm gonna beat his ass so hard he's gonna wish his dad flushed him down the toilet when he was born." "Oh yeah, and how do you plan to do that when you're tied to that cross?" Luffy asked with his usual light-hearted tone absent and an aura of seriousness about him. "How about this, I get you your sword back from wherever the Marines are keeping it and you join my crew? After all, what's a swordsman without a sword?" "I ain't agreeing to that," said Zoro with a scoff, "but if you want to get my swords back, the captain's bastard son will have them." Hearing this, Luffy turned his head to the marine base and stretched out his senses, just like he and Ace trained to do back on Dawn Island, and noticed there was a large number of marines on the roof of the base. So once again he turned himself into lightning and teleported to the roof of the base, leaving a gaping Zoro behind. Luffy rematerialized upon a large statue that was currently being erected on the roof. However, his appearance caused very marine on the roof to stop what they were doing and just stare at him in sheer bewilderment as to how he had appeared there. Helmeppo, upon seeing Luffy, screamed to his dad, "That's the bastard that hit me. Not even you've ever hit me, daddy." Immediately after Helmeppo spoke, a large man in Amarine uniform with a metal jaw and large axe in place of his right forearm spun around and struck Helmeppo across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. Walking up to his son as he was struggling to sit up after that blow to the face, he grunted, "And do you know why I've never hit you?" "Because I'm your beloved son," Helmeppo tried weakly. Morgan just snorted, "It's because you're a little bastard that's not even worth hitting." On that, Luffy could agree the little shit was barely worth hitting, but remembering that he had a job to do, he decided to get the show on the road. "What is this god-awful thing I'm standing on? Oh well, this thing's so ugly I doubt anyone will miss it." Luffy then raised his leg and coated it in lightning before bringing it down upon the statue, shattering it. Seeing the statue that was supposed to display his greatness for all to see shattered like that caused something within Morgan to snap, and he just bellowed to his men, "Get him! Bring me his damn head!" Luffy took this as his cue and teleported himself in front of Helmeppo and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and teleported them both 2 floors down to put some distance between them and the horde of marines baying for his blood. Looking into Helmeppo's eyes, Luffy growled out, "Zoro's sword, where is it?" Terrified for his life, Helmeppo managed to stutter out in a girly, high-pitched voice, "They're in my bedroom, 2nd floor and 3rd room on the right." Luffy once again teleported them both to location Helmeppo had just given him and loomed around. They had appeared in what could only be described as a fairy princess's bedroom. Everything was either pink, frilly, or both. Luffy was about to give a Helmeppo a beating for lying to him when he noticed 3 swords in the corner of the room. "Which sword is Zoro's?" Luffy barked at Helmeppo. "All of them," was all the little brat was able to get out before Luffy bonked him on the head with enough force to knock him clean out. Luffy grabbed all 3 katana swords, but as HT the window and saw Kobe was in the process of attempting to untie Zoro from the wooden cross as they were being approached by a horde of marines. Seeing this, he knew that he needed to intervene and fast, so he turned himself to lightning and appeared in the courtyard in front of Zoro and Kobe. Flashing them both a grin, he coated his back in haki as the marines opened fire. Zoro and Kobe were both left stunned as the bullets just bounced off him. From behind him he heard one of the marines yell to Captain Morgan that bullets don't work on him, and for Morgan to reply to just use their swords then. Luffy looked at Zoro. "So does our deal still stand?" he said with a grin, before cutting Zoro's bonds with his own saber and handing Zoro his swords. "I don't remember us making any kind of deal, but I'm about to raise my weapon against a marine, which will make me a criminal in their eyes, so I may as well join up with you." This caused Luffy to give his trademark grin. "However, my dream is to become the world's greatest swordsman, and if you get in the way of that, I'll kill you myself, got it?" World's greatest swordsman, eh? Well, the king of the pirates would have nothing less on his crew, Luffy said with a smirk. It was at that moment that the marines behind them marshaled their courage and attacked them with their swords. However, they were stopped by a 3-sword-wielding Zoro. Zoro held a sword in each hand and one between his teeth, and with just a few masteful swipes from each sword, a dozen marines had been yacked down. Seeing their comrades fall so easily disheartened the remaining marines, so they turned to their captain and said they were fighting monsters and it was no use. This served to further enrage Captain Morgan, who bellowed at his men, "Weakness and cowardice is not tolerated in my division. All of you put your guns to your head and pull the trigger, that is an order." The marines shared a look with one another in disbelief at the order they had just been given, but slowly a look of resignation overtook them before each one began raising their guns and pointing them towards their heads. Seeing this, Luffy was in almost stunned disbelief and not wanting to witness Needle's deaths, even if they were marines. He raised his left hand into the air and pointed it at the sky before bringing it down as he called out, "Thor's hammer." As he said this, dozens of bolts of lightning fell from the sky, each one striking a marine, leaving them unconscious and smoking slightly. Luffy's use of his devil fruit power shocked both Zoro and Morgan, but it was Morgan that voiced the question on both their minds. What are you? Luffy leveled a glare in Morgan's direction before stating coldly, I ate the rumble devil fruit. I'm a lightning man. I thought those devil fruit things were just myth? Zoro asked in disbelief. Before anything more could be said, Morgan's anger returned. Then it magnified at the disrespect he believed he was being shown by everyone. With blood pounding in his ears and his anger overriding his common sense, he launched himself at Luffy with his arm pulled back, intending on cutting him half. That downwards chop isn't going to work, stated Luffy coldly. Morgan's eyes could only widen when he heard that. It was almost as if the Straw Hat whelp could read his mind, however it was too late for him to change his attack. Morgan could then only watch helplessly as Luffy took half a step to the side, so his entire attack missed before he turned his right arm to lightning and brought it down across Morgan's axe hand, completely severing it. Air! Came the scream of agony from Morgan. Did you know that lightning is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun? Was Luffy's eerily calm question. That question was the last thing Morgan heard as he cradled his new stump, because after cutting off Morgan's arm, Luffy spun on the spot, bringing his saber up and decapitating the Marine captain. Turning round to Zoro and Kobe, Luffy just said, "Let's get out of here." Zoro was about to leave with them before the 3 weeks without sustenance caught up with him and he passed out. Turning to see what happened, Luffy could only chuckle at Zoro and carry him on his back into the town. A few hours and a few dozen plates of food later, Zoro was almost back to full strength. So where's the rest of the crew, Captain? Zoro said, turning to Luffy. Luffy, who had managed to eat even more food than Zoro, just turned to him with his mouth full of food before mumbling something incomprehensible. Taking a minute to swallow his food, he tried again. Just me and you. So we're what amounts to a pirate crew? Asked Zoro incredulously. So far anyways, replied Luffy. Meanwhile, as Zoro and Luffy were having their conversation, Kobe sat in the cafe contemplating everything he had seen so far that day and was attempting to process it. Rika, on the other hand, could only stare at Luffy in complete admiration with stars in her eyes. Luffy turned to Ririka, who was the mother of the cute little girl that was currently idolizing Luffy, as well as the owner of the restaurant they were currently eating in. You got any booze I can buy for my ship? Ririka looked up from where she currently cooking and gave Luffy a bright smile. Still high from the happiness she felt from hearing of the death of the Marine captain that had tormented and extorted the town she lived in for so many years, she told Luffy to follow her into the back and pick out what he wanted. Shrugging, Luffy just stood up and followed her into the back. After 10 minutes, Zoro was beginning to wonder what on earth was taking so long. Booze was booze after all. But just a few minutes later, Luffy walked back into the restaurant while zipping the fly on his trousers up and grinning like the cat that ate the canary, while Ririka was wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Realizing what had transpired, Zoro just smirked broadly and shook his head slightly. I'll have the food and sake you wanted delivered to your ship now. With that, Ririka gave several cooks in the restaurant various instructions, and in short order the various supplies were being carried from the restaurant. Their meal was interrupted when a group of Marines showed up outside the cafe. The patrons of the cafe, seeing the Marines, tensed as they feared the worst from the group of Marines. We want to thank you for freeing everyone on the island from the tyranny of Captain Morgan, said the Marine lieutenant at the front. Hearing this, the townspeople in the cafe began to clap and cheer for Luffy and Zoro. But, we've heard from various people around town that they've heard you claim to be pirates. So we're going to have to ask you to leave the island. Upon hearing this, the various townspeople began booing and hurling abuse at the Marines. Despite the abuse being thrown their way, the lieutenant continued, "We won't be informing Navy HQ about you, but we do need you to leave." Seeing no reason to argue as he was planning on leaving soon anyway, Luffy merely shrugged his shoulders and made to leave with Zoro following him. "Isn't he with you too?" the Marine lieutenant asked Luffy as he pointed to a still-seated Kobe. "Nah, he's just some kid I picked up when he was attacked by the fat hag I turned in earlier," said Luffy in a bored tone before he continued to leave. Once they were aboard the ship, Zoro turned to his new captain and asked, "So where to now, Captain?" Luffy's cheerfulness returned full force for the first time since the business with Captain Morgan, and he turned to his first mate and grinned. "Orangetown, I've got some business with a clown." "Huh? Buggy the clown? He's a pirate whose last known location was Orangetown. He sailed with my idol years and years ago, and I want to see what kinda man he is," explained Luffy. "What if you like what you see?" questioned Zoro. "Well, if he's the right kind of person, then I'll invite him to join my crew," stated Luffy. "And if he's not, then I kick his ass from here to the Grand Line then turn in his bounty," grinned Luffy. "And what NT on your crew but won't join us?" Luffy smiled at Zoro's use of the word us as it showed that Zoro already saw them as a team. "Simple, I kick his ass from here to the Grand Line then turn in his bounty," said a cheerful Luffy. At this, however, Zoro could only smirk. "Well then, Captain, what are we waiting for? Let's set sail already," somewhere in the East Blue. The duo of Luffy and Zoro had been sailing towards Orangetown for the past 6 days. However, they had not simply been sailing. Luffy had used this time to bring Zoro up to speed on everything he learned from Shanks and the Red Hair Pirates. Zoro visibly perked up at the explanation of Haki, understanding immediately how it could help him progress as a swordsman. Luffy's attempts to teach Zoro anything else, however, proved almost entirely futile, and the less said about Zoro's navigational skills the better, as Zoro genuinely believed to go east you just had to turn right. This gave Luffy the impression that Zoro would be able to get lost traveling in a straight line. It was around midday that Island Orangetown appeared on the horizon. Taking out a spyglass that had belonged to Alvida that Luffy had found in the captain's cabin, he observed Orangetown. "It would seem Buggy isn't the man I hoped he was," Luffy stated grimly. "Your orders, Captain?" questioned Zoro. "Bring us into dock. We'll talk a walk through the town and gather some intel on the situation." It was at this point that Zoro noticed a vein on Luffy's temple bulging slightly, and he realized that whatever it was that Luffy had seen through the spyglass had well and truly pissed him off. A short while later, Zoro and Luffy were walking through the deserted town, noticing several destroyed buildings and others that had clearly been looted, this only serving to increase Luffy's anger as well as Zoro's desire for a fight. As they made their way down a street, they heard a commotion behind them and turned to investigate. Running towards them was Nami, being chased by 3 rough-looking men. As she neared Luffy and Zoro, she smirked. "Cheers for having my back, boss. I'll just leave these 3 to you." And that was all she said before she took off running once more and slipping down a side street. "So that little bitch works for you, does she? Well, guess we're gonna have to kill you too before we get Captain Buggy's map back," sneered one of the Buggy pirates. "I thought you said it was just me and you on the crew, Captain?" questioned Zoro in an unconcerned tone. "It is," stated Luffy with a large smile on his face. "Let's just deal with the trash first." Zoro dashed towards the 3 pirates, drawing 2 of his katanas as he did. His dash carried him half a dozen feet past the 3 pirates, where he calmly resheathed his swords and turned around to face them. Moments after he turned around, several deep wounds appeared on each of the 3 pirates, spraying blood everywhere before they fell to the ground dead. "TCH, leave some for me next time, yeah," said Luffy in amusement. It was at this moment that Nami reappeared from the rooftop of a nearby house, and she looked at the scene in amazement. "Wow, you guys are really strong. Even those guys had sabers and everything, they didn't stand a chance against you." Luffy looked up at Nami and channeled his inner Shanks, letting a charming smile overtake his face. "It's wonderful to see you again, Nami. It would seem fate keeps bringing us together." Nami blushed at Luffy's words and attempted to change the subject. "Say, how about I treat you guys to some food as thanks for dealing with those goons?" Upon hearing the word food, Luffy's stomach let out a loud growl, startling both Nami and Zoro. "How are you hungry? You stuffed yourself stupid just over an hour ago," barked Zoro at a sheepish Luffy. "Come on, you two, this way," was all Nami said before jumping down from the rooftop and leading them into a nearby house. "So is this your house, Nami?" asked Luffy as he began looking round the house. "Nah, the whole town was already deserted when I got here, so I'm just borrowing it for the time being." As she said this, Nami began preparing a meal for just Luffy, as Zoro simply waved her off and sat down with a bottle of sake. After placing the food down in front of Luffy, Nami jumped back in surprise and a slight bit of fear as Luffy began devouring the food with such speed and intensity that he was practically inhaling it. "You know you can chew your food," yelled Nami. Luffy, whose face was only an inch or 2 away from his plate, looked up. "MMMFFHHMMFSSHH, who, bud? Don't talk with your mouth full, Captain." "Sorry, it's just so good. Hey Nami, you said you're the best navigator in the whole East Blue before, right?" At seeing her nod, he continued. "Plus you cook good food and your talents are matched by your beauty." Again he flashed her his charming smile. "You should definitely join my crew." Up until Luffy said that Nami had a faint blush on her face and a small smile on her face from Luffy's flattery, but upon hearing him mention his crew her whole demeanor changed. She tensed and a look of anger crossed her face. "You never said you were a pirate when we traveled to Shell's Town," spat Nami at Luffy. Luffy however didn't let Nami's change in demeanor affect him. "You never asked," said Luffy with a small grin. At this Nami faltered as she was unable to refute Luffy's point. "I'd never stoop so low as to be a pirate. All pirates are nothing but s." Luffy could tell from this that her hatred of pirates ran deep and that for such deep-seated hatred something significant must have happened to her at the hands of pirates. Nami's past was her own however, and Luffy was unwilling to pry. "You know Nami, not all pirates are like the ones you met." This immediately got Nami's attention and she fixed her gaze onto Luffy once more. Seeing that he had her undivided attention, he added, "When I was just a kid a load of pirates showed up one day. We thought they were here to raid and kill us all, but they never did. They traded peacefully with the town, played with the kids and even fought off a bandit gang that was causing trouble." Hearing this, Nami began to tear up a little at the perceived injustice. Why couldn't those pirates have come to Kokoyashi village instead of Arlong? Just like always, the mere thought of Arlong caused Nami to hear Arlong's distinctive laugh echo in her mind. Seeing her shift in mood, Luffy sought to truly drive her point home using the same line that he did with Kobe. "Look Nami, not all pirates are bad and not all marines are good. The world's not black and white like that. All you can really do is judge people as you see them." Despite the fact that Luffy's words had an obvious effect on her, she was unwilling to abandon her lifelong belief so suddenly and easily. Nami refused to back down. "I still won't become a pirate." Before Luffy could argue to get her to join his crew, Nami continued, "But I don't see any reason why we can't join forces to achieve a common goal." Despite Nami only agreeing to temporarily join forces, Luffy took this as her joining his crew, and as such he jumped up and yelled in celebration while doing a fist pump. "So what you guys doing on this island anyway? Captain wants to kick this Buggy's ass," grunted Zoro between swigs of sake. "You want to fight Buggy?" screamed an incredulous Nami. She let out a deep sigh to steady herself after seeing Luffy's big Cheshire grin and nod. "Look, Buggy is a monster with a 15 million belly bounty. There's no way you can beat him. Don't worry about me and Zoro, we can take him. Speaking of Buggy though, why were his men chasing you?" "Because I stole this from him," stated Nami as she pulled out the spoil of her last venture. "It's a map of the Grand Line." At this, Luffy's mind began working overtime and began putting a quick plan together. "You know Nami, while me and Zoro are fighting, all their attention is gonna be on us, right?" After seeing her nod, he added, "Well, while their attention is on us, it'll give you the perfect opportunity to do what you do best and rob them blind," Luffy said with a big grin. "And I'm sure I can be persuaded into letting you keep more than your fair share," said Luffy, once again channeling his inner Shanks, which once again caused a slight blush to appear on Nami's face despite her best efforts to fight it. Despite attempting to fight off her blush, Nami was styling on to Luffy's plan, which just caused Zoro to smirk slightly and shake his head in amusement. Despite only having known his captain a short amount of time, he had already realized that his captain fancied himself as something of a ladies' man. The trio exited the house and began making their way towards where Nami told them Buggy had set up camp in the local tavern. While on their way there, they came across a dog sitting directly outside a pet shop. Seeing the dog caused Luffy to almost vibrate in excitement, and he ran up to it with Zoro and Nami following him at a far more sedate pace. "Shake, shake," I said, "shake." Getting no reaction from the dog, he turned to Nami and Zoro. "Hey guys, I think this dog is broken." Before Nami or Zoro could respond to this, a voice called out, surprising them both. Looking over at the new voice, they saw an old man making his way towards them. "Hey, what are you three doing to Shushu? Huh, is that the dog's name?" questioned Luffy. "Yeah, are you three with the Buggy pirates?" asked the old man guardedly. "Don't worry old man, we ain't with them," stated Zoro as reassuringly as he was able to. "Yeah, we're here to kick Buggy's ass, old timer," said Luffy with a grin. "Just who are you three?" asked the old man, incredibly confused. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy and I'm going to be king of the pirates," yelled out Luffy, jumping into the air in excitement. "So anyways, who are you and what's the story with the broken dog?" "My name's Boodle and I'm the mayor of Orangetown, or at least I was before the Buggy pirates showed up. Can't exactly be the mayor of a ghost town now, can you? As for Shushu, he isn't broken," He belonged to Hawker, the man that built that pet shop there. It was his life's work, his treasure. When Hawker died, the last thing he said to Shu Shu was to ask him to watch over the shop while he was gone. Haven't you told Shu Shu that his owner isn't coming back? Asked an empathic Nami. Of course I have, but he still continues to sit there day and night. Of course he does. The shop is all he has left of his owner, meaning it's his treasure, said Luffy. Looking over at Zoro and Nami, he added, not all treasure is gold and silver, you know. Take me for example, this hat is my treasure. As he said that, Luffy took off his hat and smiled fondly at it. Interrupting any further conversation was the sound of heavy footfall. The pirates and mayor turned to see a giant lion being ridden by a middle-aged man with fluffy white hair and what appeared to be two animal-like fluffy ears atop his head. Well, what do we have here? If it isn't the little sneak thief and some accomplices. Buggy will be pleased when I return with his map. Get him, Richie. At that command, the lion began getting ready to pounce. With this aggressive action, Luffy raised his hand with his index finger and thumb in the shape of a gun. When Luffy pulled his thumb down, a small bullet of lightning shot out from his index finger, hitting the guy on top of the lion and sending him falling of THR back of it. As soon as Luffy had done that, Zoro jumped forwards with all three of his blades slashing at the lion several times in the space of less than a second. The pain from numerous slashes coupled with blood loss caused the lion to pass out. With the fight over, Luffy turned to his crew and asked, "Hey guys, this guy said he's a pirate, right? Well, do either of you know if he's got a bounty on his head?" questioned Luffy. Zoro approached the downed figure. "Yeah, that's Beast Tamer Moji, pretty sure he's got a bounty of 2 million. "Great. Hey old man, can you do me a favor and tie this guy up then dump him on my ship?" asked Luffy. "My name's Boodle, not old man," Boodle grumbled under his breath. "Yeah, sure, I can do that." With that, the mayor left only to return a moment later with some rope and began tying the downed Moji. "Come on guys, we've got a clown to take down," grinned Luffy, and with that the three teens set off once more towards Buggy's base of operations. It took a few minutes of walking before the trio arrived outside the tavern. Without taking his eyes off the tavern, Luffy said to Nami, "Sneak round the back and do what you do best." Acknowledging this with just a nod, Nami disappeared around the side of the building, making sure to stay out of sight of the windows. "Well, guess it's time to get Buggy's attention." Pausing to take a deep breath, Luffy bellowed at the top of his voice, "B B B B B U U U U G G G G G Y Y Y Y Y Y." "Seriously? That was your plan to get his attention?" asked an incredulous Zoro. "What flashy bastard dared call my name?" shouted a voice from within the tavern. A moment later, a man exited the building followed by 24 men dressed as various circus performers. Buggy was dressed in loose-fitted blue pants, a red and white striped t-shirt and a fur-lined captain's coat. Seeing Buggy caused Luffy to break out into hysterical laughter. "Ha ha ha, Shanks was right, you do have a big red nose." Hearing the insult to their captain's nose caused the Buggy pirates to tense in fear, as it was well known amongst them how sensitive their captain was about his nose. Buggy, however, was nearly apoplectic and he grit his teeth as a vein bulged in his forehead. "How dare you insult my nose, you flashy bastard! Kill them, I want their heads!" Buggy screeched at his men. At this order, the Buggy pirates leapt forwards ready to rip Zoro and Luffy limb from limb. Before they could take more than a single step forwards, Luffy let out a wave of haki, knocking out all the pirates save for Buggy and a man on a unicycle. Seeing what just happened to all his men, Buggy began to sweat slightly. "What the hell? How does some no-name brat like this know hockey? You gonna tell me what the hell that was, Captain?" asked a slightly freaked out Zoro. Luffy turned and looked at him with his usual Cheshire grin and said, "It's a mystery power. Kabaji, kill the swordsman, I'll deal with the flashy straw hat bastard myself." The man on THR unicycle immediately jumped towards Zoro while staying on his unicycle and brought his sword down in an attempt to decapitate Zoro. However, Zoro saw this strike coming a mile away and easily intercepted this strike with the sword held between his teeth. As Zoro and Kabaji clashed, Luffy darted forwards, his fist pulled back and covered in lightning. Unfortunately, as Luffy attempted to land his blow, Buggy separated his entire body into enormous segments. "You're not the only one that's eaten a devil fruit. I ate the chop fruit, making me a chop man." "Tch, what a pain," muttered Luffy. Quickly drawing his pistol, he fired 2 shots, one into one of Buggy's feet and another hitting one of Buggy's hands. The sudden pain from the gunshot wounds caused Buggy's concentration to slip and he lost control of his various body parts that had been floating separate to his body, causing them to fall to the floor. Capitalizing on this opportunity, Luffy quickly grabbed Buggy's head and smashed it off the floor, knocking out Buggy and ending his fight almost as quickly as it started. Looking around, he saw that Zoro was just delivering the finishing strike to his own opponent and that Nami had returned bringing with her 4 overflowing bags of treasure. "Wow, nice haul, Nami," yelled Luffy. Nami looked around at the bodies strewn all over it, looked back to Luffy. "Thanks. You know, I've gotta admit I had my doubts you'd be able to take down Buggy, and you did it so easy." Ignoring Nami's statement, Luffy cast a quick glance at their surroundings. "Hey Nami, can you throw me over that crate?" Sure. But what do you need a crate for?" asked Nami as she brought a large crate over to Luffy. "To put Buggy in, of course," replied Luffy in a tone that conveyed how stupid he found Nami's question. "Yo Zoro." Before he got any further, Zoro interrupted, "Already on it, Captain." "Hey, how did you know what I was gonna say?" asked Luffy with a childish pout. "I'm your first mate, your vice captain. It's my job to anticipate what you need," grunted Zoro as he began tying up Kabaji. "Let's get these two and the treasure onto." It took 2 trips between the 3 of them to get everything back to the ship. However, as Nami made to bring the final bag of treasure onto the ship, Luffy told her to leave it. Seeing that she was about to protest, he said, "These people need that treasure to rebuild the town, it's only right." Letting out a disappointed sigh, Nami agreed, and she just made it back onto the ship when Luffy said to her, "Besides, I did say I could be persuaded into letting you keep that treasure." The resulting blush from this statement only caused Luffy to laugh at her discomfort. "Where to next, Captain?" shouted Zoro from the upper deck. "Plot a course for the Gecko Islands." "What's on Gecko Island, Captain?" "Half a day west of there is a marine base that should make us 20 million belly richer, and in Syrup Village is our next crew member." "Aye aye, Captain." Within a day of their departure from Orangetown, the trio had settled into a rudimentary routine. Nami would sunbathe and relax in a deck chair that she had pulled from seemingly thin air, while also checking on their heading every so often to ensure they were still on course. Zoro would lift weights in the morning using a barbell with all the weight at the end and holding it the same way he would his sword, swinging it forwards and backwards. This weight training regime would usually last a couple of hours before he'd draw his swords and begin his speed training, where he would attempt to make his slashes faster and faster. While this training was extremely demanding, he didn't train to the point of exhaustion at Luffy's request, just in case they encountered a threat that he would need Zoro's assistance for. As for Luffy, spent a significant amount of time meditating, or at least that's what he told Nami and Zoro. The truth, however, was that this meditation would last no longer than an hour before he'd fall asleep, still sat in his lotus meditating position. Meditation was something that Shanks' journal, as well as his older brother Ace, said helped with his hockey training, and over the years it was something that had become a part of his daily life. It was on the 4th day of the journey that the routine changed slightly after Zoro asked Luffy about what he did back in Orangetown. "So you gonna tell me what you did back in Orangetown, Captain?" After not getting a reply to his question, Zoro asked again, only to get no response once again. A tick mark rapidly forming on his forehead, Zoro proceeded to whack Luffy on the back of his head with the scabbard of one of his swords and sending Luffy sprawling on the deck of the ship. At this rude awakening, Luffy immediately jumped to his feet and began scanning the area looking for danger. "Oh hey Zoro. Did you see what hit me?" asked a confused Luffy as he rubbed the back of his head absent-mindedly where Zoro had struck him. "Yeah, I hit you. I asked you a question that you ignored 'cause you were too busy sleeping," barked an irate Zoro, his temper not abating in the slightest. "I wasn't asleep, I was in deep meditation," said Luffy as his best foe sage voice. Seeing that Luffy wasn't going to admit to being asleep, and having already seen how deep his stubborn streak can run throughout their time together so far, Zoro merely grumbled a few select insults under his breath before repeating his initial question. "I said, are you going to tell me what it was that you did back in Orangetown?" At seeing Luffy's look of pure bewilderment, Zoro clarified, "When you made those pirates pass out with just a look." A look of realization overcame Luffy as he suddenly worked out what Zoro wanted to know. "Oh, that's just my mystery power." Luffy's answer, unsurprisingly, did not satisfy Zoro in the slightest, and he was torn between wondering if his captain was an idiot or if he was deliberately misleading him. And just what is this mystery power? Zoro managed to grit out from between clenched teeth. "It's a form of haki," was the simple reply. Zoro was forced to fortify himself by taking a deep breath before he asked, "Why couldn't you say that the first time?" As he asked this, he also fixed Luffy with his best glare. A glare that sadly for Zoro had absolutely no affect. "Because mystery power sounds way cooler," said Luffy in a tone one would only usually hear when explaining something to a small child. It was after saying this that Luffy noticed the large tick mark on Zoro's forehead and vein bulging at his temple, so he attempted to placate him as best he could by explaining what he knew about that particular form of haki and how Zoro probably wasn't born with that ability. While he was disappointed that he may never be able to use that particular useful ability, Zoro understood and went on to question Luffy about the other forms of haki. Instead of answering him, he reached into one of the inner pockets of the captain's coat he keeps draped over his shoulders and pulled a small, leather-bound journal and handing it to Zoro. "In this is everything I know about haki, and it was given to me by my idol when I was a kid. So be careful with it." Zoro immediately began flicking through the book, and after skimming through the very short journal he asked about starting some sort of training regime for it. Seeing no reason not to help, Luffy agreed, and together they came up with a schedule whereby Zoro could begin haki training while maintaining his swordsman and physical training. Luffy did offer to let Nami to join in with this, and despite some interest she ultimately declined to participate. It was 2 days later that this ship pulled into the harbor of the small island that housed the marine base, and together they hauled their 3 captives off the ship and into the bounty office. Inside the bounty office they joined the back of the small queue and waited their turn to be called forwards by the marine sat behind a desk at the back of the room. "Next," shouted the marine without even looking up, and at his call a tall, heavily set bounty hunter walked forwards while holding onto a pirate that had been clapped in irons. "State your name and the name of your bounty." "Deadeye Duncan here to turn in Jack Sparrow." At this the marine looked up, and recognizing the captured pirate he smirked slightly. "Personal effects in the box." As he said this he motioned towards the small box at the edge of his desk. Deadeye then placed all the personal effects of the captured pirate into the box for the marine to examine. "Let's see here. 1 saber with a rusted and blunt edge, 1 pistol with a single shot and a compass that doesn't point north." The marine then fixed Sparrow with an amused glance. "You know you have to be without a doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of." "Ah, but you have heard of me," Sparrow stated, his tone seeming to be both mystical as well as flamboyant at the same time, something that Luffy doubted few others could manage. The marine processing the bounty merely shook his head slightly before he barked, "Ensign, take him down to cell 101 and prep him for Ennie's lobby." At this order the ensign snapped off a crisp salute and took Sparrow through a door to the left. "Now sign here, here and finally here." With the paperwork filled out the bounty left the office with a small stack of belly bills. Just like before, the marine didn't look up before motioning the next in line to come forwards, and when he did so a drunken unkempt man with a large shaggy beard staggered forwards. Unlike with the bounty hunter previously, the marine didn't get chance to say anything before the drunk spoke. "Are you guys still paying for rare animal pelt? 'Cause take a look at this genuine mink." At this he held up a dead rat, causing Nami to snicker, Zoro to chuckle and Luffy to let out a full belly laugh. The marine however was not so amused. Looking up he let out a deep sigh. "Listen, this is the 3rd time this week you've tried this. I've told you before, bugger off," shouted the marine. "Tch, they don't call you Harry the bastard for nothing, do they?" the drunkard shouted. "No, they call me Ted," responded the completely incredulous marine captain. Seemingly wanting the last word, TJE drunkard just threw the rat at the marine, hitting him square in the face with it once again, causing the trio to laugh and guffaw. Gritting his teeth in anger at the highly persistent drunk, he then motioned for the trio to come forwards. "Name and name of the bounty you're collecting." Roronoa Zoro, bringing in Beast Tamer Moji, Acrobat Kabaji and Buggy the Clown. At hearing those names the marine looked over his desk to verify, however not seeing Buggy he asked, "And where is the clown?" Upon this question Luffy kicked the crate they had brought with them. "Hey Big Nose. Who are you calling Big Nose, you flashy bastard?" said a muffled from within the crate. Hearing the voice from the crate the marine laughed and nodded his head before he said that was good enough for him, as Buggy's sensitive was well known around those parts. As before he motioned to box at the edge of the desk and had them drop the various personal effects into it, whereupon the trio deposited the multitude of knives, pistols, swords and even a small wrist-mounted flamethrower. Vet good. Ensign, take these 3 below to cell 111, 145 and 176. Now Mr. Rorinoa, you know the drill, sign here, here and here. With the paperwork completed, the trio left the office carrying a large bag and 20 million belly richer. Once back on the ship, Nami turned to face Luffy. So how are we splitting the reward money? As she asked this, her eyes never left the bag of money in Luffy's hand. Simple. We each get 3 million and the rest gets put somewhere safe, and it'll be used to pay for repairs and upgrades for the ship as well as the supplies we need. Seeing that Nami was about to argue that this arrangement was unfair, Luffy just handed her share over before walking away with Zoro. You want your share, Zoro? Nah, just hold on to it for me, Captain. Shrugging, Luffy continued into the captain's cabin where he separated Zoro's share of the bounties before putting the remainder in a large chest that was at the foot of his bed. A chest that had at one point contained many of Alvida's unmentionables. With the money safely put away, Luffy returned to the deck of the ship and ascended the stairs to the upper deck in order to take the helm. Despite Syrup Village usually only being 4 or 5 hours away from the marine base, the wind was against them, doubling the length of the trip, meaning they didn't pull up to the island until early the next morning. Stepping onto the shore, they made their way towards the slope that would take them towards the village. However, a rustling sound coming from the bushes at the top of the slope alerted them to the fact that they were not alone. As they looked up towards the bush, they saw a dark-skinned teen with an incredibly long nose, black curly hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing a green bandana and brown overalls, suddenly jump out holding a slingshot. Halt! If you have come here to cause trouble, then me, the brave pirate Captain Usopp, and my 8 million men will destroy you, yelled the teen. Despite his words, the trio could see he was scared beyond belief due to the sweat dripping from his forehead and his legs shaking so badly his knees were knocking together. What you mean, you and those 3 little kids in the bush? Deadpanned Luffy. Ah, he's onto us, run away. Squeaked 3 terrified voices from the bush before 3 young boys no older than 7 ran out of the bush heading in the direction of the village. Damn, he saw through my ploy, mumbled the teen to himself louder than he had planned as the trio at the base of the slope heard he clearly and began to snicker. Seeing them snickering at him hardened his resolve and he readied his slingshot and aimed at Luffy. Stop laughing or I'll silence you. They don't call me Proud Usopp for nothing, you know. Now that a weapon, of a sort at least, had been drawn, the trio stopped laughing, and while Nami and Zoro still looked amused, Luffy grew serious. Wow, a pirate using a slingshot, now I've seen everything, chuckled Nami. Saying this only caused Usopp to aim at her. However, it was Luffy that spoke next in a calm and deadly serious voice. Bet your life on it. That's a weapon, and weapons aren't for threats, they're meant for action. So now you've drawn your weapon, are you willing to bet your life on it? The combination of Luffy's words, the perceived implied threat of death, and the 1,000-yard stare caused all of Usopp's resolve to crumble and his bravado to vanish as his legs gave way from under him and he fell down the slope, stopping at the feet of Luffy. Luffy just loomed over the prone form of Usopp. I've just got one important question for you, stated Luffy in the same calm and deadly tone before he added in a cheerful on. Where can we get something to eat? I'm starved. Hearing the completely benevolent question almost caused Usopp to pass out from relief. He'd been so sure Luffy was going to kill him. I know somewhere, follow me. I'll even pay, my treat, said a still somewhat nervous Usopp. Usopp then led them to Syrup Village, pointing out any buildings of note. However, since it was a fairly small village that mainly relied on agriculture, there wasn't much to really show. He took them to the only restaurant on the island and, true to his word, paid for their meal, or sake in Zoro's case. Over the meal, the 4 agreed to waive off what happened at the beach as just a misunderstanding. The conversation flowed freely and eventually Usopp's father became the topic of the conversation. Wow, my day is really a crew member for Red Hair Shanks. Seriously. At this, Luffy nodded. Wow, I can't believe it. My dad sails with one of the 4 emperors of the sea. It was clear to anyone that could hear him that Usopp was incredibly proud of his dad and worshipped him. TCH, he's more than just a crew member, he's one of Shanks' officers. Usopp at hearing this quite literally swelled with pride. You know, it's always been a dream of mine to become a brave warrior of the sea just like my old man. Nami just rolled her eyes slightly at this, which is something that went unnoticed by the other 3 as Luffy saw his opportunity. Why don't you sail with me and together we can turn this world upside down? After saying this he gave Usopp the Luffy grin. "Yeah maybe," said Usopp noncommittally. "Luffy, didn't you mention something the other day about repairs to the ship? You should look into getting that sorted as soon as you can," interjected Nami. "That's a point." Luffy then turned to Usopp. "I don't suppose you know of anywhere we can get our ship repaired and maybe a few upgrades sorted out?" Usopp took a moment to think, scratching his chin as he did so. "Well, there's always Mary, I suppose. He's one of the butlers at that big house up there on the hill we passed on the way into the village. I dunno if he can do what you're after exactly, but I know he's designed and built a few ships." Immediately, not wanting to waste any time, Luffy immediately juned out of his seat, ready to set off to find Mary. "Calm down, Captain, the guy isn't going anywhere. Besides, I've still got half my bottle left." At this, Zoro held his bottle up to show he hadn't finished his drink. "Yeah, besides. Oh, would you look at the time. I've got to go do the thing at the thing." Usopp then suddenly got up and dashed out of the restaurant so fast he almost left an after-image behind. Nami narrowed her eyes at Usopp's retreating form. What on earth was all that about? Luffy and Zoro just shrugged and went back to their food, or sake in Zoro's case. It was a short while later that the three young boys from the beach entered the restaurant and made a beeline for the trio. "Where's our captain?" piped up one of the boys. Recognizing a perfect opportunity to have a little bit of fun with the young boys, Luffy just leant back in his seat, patted his slightly bulging stomach and declared he couldn't eat another bite. Nami looked on, giggling slightly at the joke the other two were playing as Zoro leant forwards towards the three boys and said, "Your captain was delicious." Sufficiently freaked out, all three boys jumped a foot into the air before pointing at Nami and declaring her a sea witch at the top of their voices. Luffy laughed especially hard though when he heard Zoro mumble, "Well, they're not exactly wrong, are they?" Once they had calmed down, the three boys went on to inform Nami, Luffy and Zoro exactly where Usopp had gone and why. How every day at the same time he had snuck his way onto the grounds of the mansion just to tell a young orphan girl called Kaya silly made-up stories in an effort to cheer her up after the death of her parents. They also offered to show them Usopp's super secret entry onto the grounds. With nothing better to do and having business up at the mansion anyway, the trio decided to take up the offer, and so the six of them made their way to where it's this way round the side. "Follow me," said Carrot, leading them round the side of a tall hedge and stopping at a point where the hedge was far less dense. "Here, hold these branches apart." "Wow, these gardens are beautiful," said an impressed Nami. "Quick, this way, we can't let the head butler see us." The group moved as stealthily as they could around the garden until they saw Usopp in a tree talking through an open window to a sickly-looking blonde girl. Luffy waited a moment before clearing his throat to get their attention. Hearing the unexpected noise, the Usopp and the girl turned to see Luffy and his friends, the surprise of which nearly caused Usopp to fall from the tree. Luckily for him, he managed to hold onto the branch for dear life. However, the sight of hanging onto the branch upside caused him to resemble a sloth somewhat, and it was that sight that caused the girl to giggle. Since the two had stopped their conversation, Luffy used that opportunity to start talking with the girl. "Ah, you must be Miss Kaya. I see the stories of your beauty do not do you justice." Zoro just looked sideways at Luffy before smirking and shaking his head. Nami, on the other hand, kept her face totally impassive while inwardly fumed at his audacity. Giggling slightly at his words, Kaya responded, "Yes, my name's Kaya, and what might I do for you?" "I need just two things, my fair lady. Firstly, just a smile from your sweet lips. And secondly, I am told your butler Mary has experience designing ships, and I am interested in perhaps purchasing his services in a project." Kaya giggled slightly once again before smiling widely at Luffy's silliness. "I see, then you shall have both. Oh Mary, could you come here a moment?" An older gentleman whose hair reminded Luffy slightly of a goat's head appeared at the window alongside Kaya. "This gentleman here is interested in purchasing your services as a shipwright." "Oh, I see, I won't be but a moment, young man." A moment later he came out of a door leading to the house. "So what service is it exactly that you need? Would you like to come to my ship so we can discuss the details and whether the job is something you do?" Mary inclined his head slightly in affirmation, then followed Luffy to his ship. "It's not a bad ship," he said upon coming to the shore where Luffy had left it moored. "What is it you had in mind?" "Well, the stern mast has a crack running up it, so I'd like that replacing. There is also several planks of wood on the hull and the deck of the ship that need replacing." Luffy pointed the various defects he was mentioning with his finger as he and Mary moved towards the front of the ship before he continued. I also need a figurehead for the ship as well as new sails. The cannons are functional but outdated, so I'd like them replacing. Oh yeah, and the crew quarters, I'd like that separating into two, so I've got a women's quarters as well as men's. Mary took on board everything Luffy had said. It's certainly achievable. What sort of budget are you on, my boy? Can't really spend any more than 12 million. Upon hearing the kind of budget he was working with, Mary nearly fainted. My boy, for 10 million I will give you everything you have asked for and more. And with that the two shook hands, sealing deal.